All right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the WGSN-DB Going Solo Media, Going Solo Veterans Corner. I'm your host, retired Army First Sergeant and author Paul Holbert, coming to you live from Northern Virginia. Our goal, as you know, of the program is to connect veterans across the United States and allow them to share their careers, their experiences, their transitions, and what they're doing in their community today. So before we get started, I want to thank our sponsor, Quest Jewelers of Merrifield, Virginia. QuestJewelers.com. Whether you're looking for a fine piece of jewelry or that custom piece for someone special, Quest can make it for you. So please visit them at QuestJewelers.com. I want to thank them for taking the time and the effort to support our veterans program. So let's meet tonight's guest, Robert Levinson. Rob is a career Air Force officer and veteran who retired as a lieutenant colonel and served as a military intelligence officer and a commander. He currently works as a senior defense analyst in Washington, D.C., and is a graduate of the U.S. Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs and Harvard's program for senior executives in national and international security. So welcome to the program, Rob.
Thanks, Paul. Great to be here.
Yeah, we appreciate you taking the time out to spend with us this evening. So, Rob, usually what we like to do is we like to take a little time to talk with our veteran guests on the show and ask them about their military careers and their military experiences. Um, so, if you don't mind, I know I thought it was interesting that you said, or that your bio said that you attended the Air Force Academy. I was actually stationed at Fort Carson, Colorado, in Colorado Springs, right down from the academy, for about 3 years, and never had an opportunity to get up to actually visit the academy. So, can you tell us a little bit about your experiences there at the academy?
Sure, Paul. So I got to the academy about, I suppose it was 3 or 4 weeks after my high school graduation in 1983, and I graduated in 1987. I
Hmm.
was a political science, international affairs major with a concentration in Western Europe, which, of course, during my military career, I was never stationed in Western Europe, but that's the way things go.
Yeah.
But had a great 4 years there. I mean, sometimes it was pretty tough, particularly my freshman year. There were times I thought of sort of leaving, but stuck it out. And really, the thing that sticks with me the most is really the people. Earlier today, in fact, I just had a Zoom chat with my classmates, and there's about 800 or 900 of us that are still stay in touch, try to have this bond with each other that really is unparalleled. Even though some of these guys and gals I wasn't the best friends with necessarily, but there's still that special bond, and I think that's what going through an experience like the Air Force Academy, you establish this bond with people that's really something special. You go through good times and bad, and you're kind of there for each other and take care of each other. We just passed Memorial Day, and we all sort of swap stories about the guys that are no longer with us. We've lost a few, some to combat or military training accidents, others just to cancer or car accidents and things like that. But we all sort of trot out those funny stories about the guys we knew. But it really is quite a special and unique sort of bonding experience. I think that's kind of what sticks with me the most.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's interesting that you say that because, I still stay in touch with some of the soldiers and NCOs that I've served with during my time. And, you're right, the bond that you form during those times is something special, and it's something that really never goes away. Especially as you said, when you talk about people that you lost for various reasons. So yeah, the bond of veterans together. It's interesting you say that is something that we just cherish. I know as we go through our careers and even afterwards. So I know that you were a military intelligence officer, and I'm sure you've heard all the jokes about that being a contradictory in terms, right?
Yes,
Military intelligence in the same sentence.
right.
Um, but you said that you never did get to ship out or deploy to Western Europe, but that was your area of concentration.
Yeah. So I went to intelligence officer school, And my big objective when, we got to put down sort of a dream sheet of where we want to go. And I wanted to go anywhere overseas. I didn't care. I think I looked at every country that we had people in the Air Force, and I put them down on the list. And actually, I wound up going to Panama, which was really terrific. At the time, it was a very interesting place. This is the late 1980s. There's a lot going on in Central America, so it was very exciting. I happened to be there for Operation Just Cause, which was actually the invasion of Panama.
Yeah.
Of course, it was personally very fulfilling. I met my wife there. We got married, shortly after the invasion. Actually, the invasion actually stalled my wedding. Not the actual day, but the date we were scheduled got screwed up because of the invasion. We had to postpone it, but we managed to get married, and then we actually managed to do another tour, and that really set the course of my career, because even though I had that Western European background, I really spent most of my career in and around Latin America. I did 2 tours in Panama and other tours with U.S. Southern Command in Washington, but focused again on Latin America and doing analysis on Latin America. That was the bulk of my career was spent either in Latin America or focusing on Latin America. I went and got a master's degree in Latin American studies from the University of California, San Diego. One of the best deals in the Air Force. They basically sent me to be a college student for a year and a half. Got to grow my hair long and not wear a uniform, and be in San Diego of all places, real miserable location, as you can imagine. Used to wake up every day, throw on my flip-flops T-shirt, which was my uniform of the day, and look at my wife and say, "Can you believe I'm getting paid to do this?" It was pretty incredible. Interesting how things work out. Like I say, I always thought I wanted to go to Western Europe and wound up in Latin America, and it was a terrific career.
It is kind of interesting how that happens, because I took German in college, and my first overseas tours were 3 tours in Korea.
Yeah.
So, and by the time I got to Germany, I had forgotten half of what I had learned and had to relearn all of it. So it is kind of funny how that type of stuff happens to us. So it sounds like you had a variety of assignments. But if there was something really memorable about your military career, your military experience, what would that be? What is something that really stands out to you as memorable about your military career?
Well, I suppose, there's probably 2. My time in Panama, that first tour, like I say, was pretty exciting. I was there for combat Operation Just Cause. I got very involved in operations there, and even some little skirmishes that occurred before Operation Just Cause were really quite exciting. In fact, I remember when I was leaving the assignment, the colonel I worked for said, you've had in a way, everything else in your career is going to pale in terms of experience to this experience because of the excitement of combat operations. Remember, Operation Just Cause was the biggest military operation up to that time since the Vietnam War. Now, of course, a year later we had Desert Storm and things like that, but for a long time this was a pretty big deal. So that sticks out quite a bit. And then the other, I think, was my tour as a commander. You mentioned Korea. I spent a year in Korea. It was a remote tour without my family as a commander of a small unit at some place called Wonju Air Station, which is far north up Korea. We had an interesting mission dealing with seismic monitors, but I was the only officer in charge of a bunch of enlisted guys and a few Korean civilians that worked for me as well. But that was really neat to be the commander at a remote location. And actually, it was great. As I said, the best part of that job is my boss, the colonel I worked for, wasn't in Korea. He was in Hawaii. So having a boss that's 10,000 miles away, and he was a great guy and just said, "Rob, call me if you have a problem. Otherwise, I'll leave you alone." But being responsible for the mission, being responsible for the men who worked for me. I didn't have any women at the time. That was a really special experience, taking care of the mission, but also taking care of them and bonding, another bonding experience with them. I'm still in touch with a few of the guys I commanded. And just, having that responsibility on your shoulders, and hopefully, I had a good tour. Things worked out well. The unit performed well. Didn't have any major incidents with my troops. So that all was exciting. Had some interesting times in Korea, but overall, so those are the 2 experiences that stick with me, sort of the beginning of my career in Panama and then my command tour in Korea.
Yeah, I mean, I completely understand about your experiences in command time? Because I think my most rewarding experience while I was in was as a first sergeant. As I got near the end of my career, and I was like you, I had spent most of my time in TO&E units, deployable units, combat units. So I get to Germany and they make me a first sergeant of a 125 person signal company, of which I had 36 female soldiers. So it was my first real exposure to having female soldiers, and there I was, a first sergeant. So it's always a unique experience to be in a command position, whether as a commander like you were. And I think the first sergeant time I had was again the same thing, one of the most rewarding ones. So I can completely understand that. Um, so what do you think? What do you think the military really taught you? What did they instill in you during your time?
I guess, if I had to say anything, I think, and it's a philosophy. I had a mentor who's a retired Air Force 2-star general. I met him while I was a cadet at the Air Force Academy. We're still friends. Um, but he had a very successful career in the Air Force, and he told me, when I was second lieutenant, he said, you want to be successful, you take care of the people, and the people will take care of the mission. And
Mm-hmm.
throughout my Air Force career, and really throughout my civilian career since time in the Air Force, that's always stuck with me. Most good things get accomplished as part of a team. I mean, you have outstanding individuals, and you want people to get the credit for the achievements that they have, and you want to take credit for your achievements, and that's all well and good. But really, it's about teamwork. And so I think that's the lesson I took away is, if you bond together and work as a team, and one of the things about the military, and it started with the Air Force Academy. The Air Force Academy, because of the way the congressional nominations work, you really have a spread of people from across the country. It's
Yeah.
it's really evenly distributed based on population, because every congressman gets to nominate people. And so I'm this kid from the suburbs of San Francisco in California, and I'm meeting kids from the backwoods of Alabama and other places, kids I never probably would have gotten to know otherwise. And you find that you may have differences in philosophies and life and your views on things, but there's that common bond with the mission, and you realize that your success depends on the success of everybody on the team. And that like I say, in my civilian job, when I've been in a management position or anything, I've always thought, look, if I just take care of my people, I have good people, and if I just make sure that they have the tools they need, if they have a personal issue that I can help them with and help them with that, then the mission and the job will take care of itself.
Yeah, that's a good point, especially when you get into the service and you're talking about meeting people from all these different backgrounds, from all over the country. One thing I noticed when I got into the military, nobody cared really, other than good ribbing, where you were from, what your ethnic background was, what your religion was. Once you got into that together, that's all that really mattered, was working together. And I think that's a valuable lesson, I think that veterans learn during their time in the military. Um,
Yeah, I
so
think
so
so.
what what was it that finally told you, that made you realize, yeah, I think it's time. It's time to retire. It's time to move on. Was there anything in particular, or how did you make that determination?
Well, I was kind of at about 20 years. So, I then, after, once you're at 20, then it's, as they say, you're working for half pay after that, because
Yeah.
because of the pension. So I was in Washington, D.C. My kids were in school. We had been in Washington. Let's see, this was 2007. So we had been in Washington now at that time for about 5 years. Kids were really settled in. So I had an opportunity for another assignment, and I was a lieutenant colonel. I could wait around to meet a board for full colonel, but I had a good career, but nothing super outstanding. And I thought my chances were for '06 were not especially great. And the move actually would have been back to California, which would have been nice. But given my skill set and my contacts, my post Air Force options were really best in Washington, D.C. And so looking at not wanting to move my kids, kind of iffy chance for another promotion, and then that network that I had built quite an extensive network that I knew I could call upon to find a job. And then luckily, the way the Air Force was working at that time, I didn't have to retire, I didn't have to move, and basically I could go looking for a job and not put in my paperwork until I had a solid job offer. My wife said, "You're not getting out until you have a job." And so I had a solid job offer. And once I put in my paperwork, I could get out in 60 days. So that's what I had, a solid job offer. I got out, and actually I was on terminal leave and still drawing I was still drawing a paycheck from the Air Force for terminal leave while I was starting my civilian job. So that all worked out really well. So I think it was a combination of those things. I was loving the Air Force. It had nothing to do with pushing me out. It was just the right sort of constellation of factors that it just sort of made sense for myself and my family and my post-Air Force career to get out at that time.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, because that's a big decision for all of us, isn't it? When we come to that point and you're trying to decide, is it time to get out? What do I do? I've got a lot of decisions to make. But I understand that you were a mentor for a transition program for veterans transitioning out of the military. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so I've been involved with this program. It's called American Corporate Partners, ACP, and you can look it up online. It's kind of on hold right now with the crisis and everything, but basically, it's people in corporate America, and you get assigned a veteran. And not only veterans get to be the mentors. In my case, I am, but there are others that are not veterans but seek to mentor, and it's to help veterans transition. And they usually look for a veteran. They give me a choice. They give me a few guys or gals that are getting out, and usually people that have a background similar to mine. So my experiences would be most relevant to them. And we just sort of meet. You get them for a year. We sort of meet once a month, maybe. Sometimes we talk on the phone. We'll have lunch. We'll go to a bar and have a beer. I'll look over the resume and just try and share with them my experiences, what I found positive in my transition, what negative, what sort of questions to ask. I think that's where I can be most helpful. Is I can't give you the answers, but I can tell you the questions that you need to answer. One of the things I found with veterans, the first thing I tell them is making that transition. Your first decision, I think, is geography. Where do I want to live? A lot of people want to live in Washington, D.C. because they're great jobs. Some people say, well, I'll live anywhere. A lot of people want to go back home, wherever home is, where they grew up or where mom and dad are or something like that, because that will govern every other decision that you make, in terms of job hunt, in terms of the salary that you're looking for, all of that. And so I sort of try to walk people through, let's look at those decisions. Have you made those decisions? Have you talked with your family about that? How do they feel about moving? Are your kids in school? Do you want to move? Do you not want to move? And then we start talking about things like how to, I remember I had no idea. How do you talk about salary? In the military, you never have to worry about how much you're going to get paid. It's published every year. And I got this many years and I'm this ranked. That's what I'm going to get paid. And
they tell you, don't they?
Right. It's all figured out for you. I remember my brother's an HR guy out in Silicon Valley, and having long conversations with him about what do I do when they ask me about salary? How do I approach that conversation? And then I try and share that, what worked for me with that, with other veterans, because that, again, was something I had no experience with. And most veterans really have no experience with those sorts of questions.
That sounds like a really worthwhile program, because I can attest to the value of something like that. I retired from Germany and was moving back to the States. And I had a retired sergeant major who just happened to be a friend of mine, who was a civilian running the transition center there in Kitzingen, Germany, when I retired. And he helped me, he guided me through that and made the transition so smooth and so easy. So yeah, that's definitely a worthwhile cause that you're involved in. So it's good to hear, that you're doing something like that to give back to the veterans that are trying to make that transition, after you did.
And anybody can participate. Just like I say, I think it's acp.org, and you just go there. And if you want to sign up, if you're a veteran who's, say, within a year of transition, then go ahead and sign up, and they'll find you a mentor. And I think some guys I was more involved with, some a little less, depending on what they needed. But some I think I helped a lot. Others, I had one that he didn't have. I didn't have a lot of experience. He was a photographer and a filmmaker, and he wanted to start his own filmmaking business. And I had no experience with anything like that, but I had a friend who did, and I hooked him up with my friend, and basically sort of handed him off to this friend who was in that industry, and great things happened for him because of my friend. So it was my network more than anything else, and that worked out great. But it's a great program, and it's really satisfying to be part of it, and I hope it provides good service. I think so too. And again, any vet can sign up for this totally free of charge. So it works out great.
All right. Yeah, that's good. And I see that they put it up on the screen for us
Yeah,
as
great.
well
Yeah, it's
as a matter of
HTTP.com.
information. Yeah. So let me ask you one more question here before we take our break.
Okay.
I noticed on your bio that you spent some time working as a lobbyist in DC. Kind of curious how that is. Would you share just a little of that with us?
Sure. So lobbyist is kind of has some interesting connotations for it. People usually have a negative idea. Lobbyists, there's three kinds of lobbyists. I would say there's lobbyists who work for a cause. Some organization that it usually has a cause that they care about. There's professional lobbyists who are sort of hired guns that work for a lobbying firm that get hired by whoever to advocate for whatever that client wants to pay them to advocate for. And then there's corporate lobbyists who sort of work for a corporation and sort of work on behalf of that corporation. So I was in that first category. I worked for American Israel Public Affairs Committee, which is sort of the largest and largest membership pro-Israel organization in the United States. And what I did is I spent most of my time on Capitol Hill talking to members of Congress about the priorities for the United States vis-a-vis its relationship with Israel. Because of my military background, I worked a lot on security issues. I lobbied in support of foreign aid for Israel, which was all military aid, missile defense cooperation. The United States and Israel have an extensive relationship there. I worked on. Also, they used to do this. They don't do so much anymore. There were earmarks, which were where a member of Congress could dedicate money to certain things, and there were Israeli companies that sold things to the U.S. military and wanted some help with those things. We wouldn't make the sale or anything, but if the U.S. military wanted something from an Israeli company, we could get a member of Congress involved and sort of work on those things. So it was a lot of fun knocking on doors, talking to a lot of members of Congress, senators, congressmen, sometimes escorting other people to go talk to them, but really getting to see sort of how the sausage get made when it comes to some foreign policy and legislative action. Mostly, again, working on Capitol Hill.
Okay. Yeah, it does sound kind of interesting, and I'm sure that you had the opportunity to rub elbows with a lot of different people while doing that. So that's why I kind of wanted to get a little bit of an idea of what you were doing. Okay, so we're going to take our commercial break very quickly, and then when we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Rob. So please stand by. Okay, welcome back, and you're listening to the Veterans Corner on the WGSN-DB Going Solo Radio Network, and we're talking with our guest tonight, retired Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Rob Levinson. So let's get back to our discussion. Rob, we were been talking about your career and your experiences in the military, and some of the things you've done since you've retired. But I wanted to talk with you, and we had discussed this, and I know this is something that I think you felt near and dear to you, is that the perception of our military veterans and how they want to be perceived. And when you look at what's happened through our history, each of our wars have been a little different. World War II, they were called the greatest generation, and of course we were attacked. People stood up. The veterans, a lot of them didn't wait to be drafted. They volunteered, took off, served their country. And then, of course, I think in returning, from World War II, a lot of those veterans were just more happy to be back and be alive than worried about how they were perceived and trying to integrate back into public life. And then we get into the Korean War. I think there was a little bit more public indifference with the Korean War because we had just gotten out of World War II. And I think while people supported the military, nobody was really anxious to be in another long, drawn out war. So again, you had veterans serving the country over in somewhere else, in harm's way, just not long, not more than 5 years or so after the end of World War II. But then, things really changed. And I was in high school during Vietnam. And I still remember, in fact, I was, the end of Vietnam happened about 2 years before I graduated. But I remember the things on TV. I remember the things being said about the men and women who were serving our country, how they were portrayed by a lot of people, a lot of the protesters, people back home. And so when that group of veterans came home, they were not really welcome. They were made to feel like they had done something wrong. They were made to feel like they were killers, murderers, baby killers. They were called all kinds of names. And I think that really turned a page in our history in terms of our military support in the country. And it wasn't until I had the honor to serve in Operation Desert Storm. I was part of Second Armored Cav Regiment, and I remember the turnaround that not only political leaders had done, but the way the public was, and the way they supported our operation. Um, when we deployed to the desert for Desert Storm. And then, of course, you get into, enduring freedom, Iraq, Afghanistan, and a lot of the more current conflicts that we have. And you have that support that I think, is finally coming and staying here for our nation's veterans. And I don't know if that's a product of because it's a volunteer force and a military career is not for everyone, neither is serving in the military. So I think people tend to appreciate people who do more. But what do you think? I just like to get your take on this. What do you think about the development of the perception of our veterans through, the last 50 to 60 years and how it's changed through each of those conflicts?
Yeah, well, I think again, starting back with World War II, the thing with World War II was it was a pretty universal experience. I mean, basically, if you were a healthy male at that time, you were going to serve. If you didn't, something was really wrong. Um,
Yeah.
but if you were a healthy male of a certain age, say between about 18 and probably mid 30s, you were going to serve. And so when they came home, the vets came home. The vets were everybody. I mean, it was everybody's dad, uncle, brother, whatever.
Hmm.
So, but like you say, I don't think people were too concerned with their perception. They just want to get on with life. Remember, life had been put on hold for about 5 years.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, the whole economy had been put on hold. I think 70-80% of our economy was devoted to national defense. People were rationing and all those kind of things. I mean, the war was such a all-encompassing experience for every American. They were touched by it in some way. Um, and then, like you said, Korea was a bit of the forgotten war. Again, you would say people weren't anxious. A lot of the World War II vets went back to Korea. People
Hmm.
weren't anxious for that one. And again, they came home. I don't know that there was much of a change. And then, like you say, Vietnam. I think the challenge with Vietnam is with the veterans, many people conflated their feelings about the war and the policies of the war with the feelings about the men and women who fought the war. Yeah. And that really, I think by the time of Desert Storm, because you even saw that in Desert Storm, there was sort of a re-recognition of the Vietnam veterans. And I think America kind of realized that however we feel about the war and the choices that the leaders make about going to war and the justice of the cause or whatever you think about that, that should not reflect on the men and women who serve. The men and women who serve do what they do, and they do what they're told. And they're not making most of those policy choices. They're simply going. And I think you're right. The other thing is now we're an all-volunteer force, so people recognize that, these people have volunteered to do something that for the country. They're not draftees. And so there's a recognition. And you see that even now. You mentioned both Iraq and Afghanistan. I think the causes of those wars, and I think, I don't think it's too big a stretch to say that, the bloom is kind of off the rose with both of those conflicts. I think most Americans, including most veterans, are saying, even veterans of those wars, are starting to say, it's time for these things to wind down. So, yeah. But nobody is saying, however they feel about those conflicts today, that should reflect on veterans. But at the same time, the thing that I get concerned about is sort of these two images that you have. The veteran is hero or the veteran is victim. You see the veteran who has either psychological or physical wounds from the war, and they're a victim. And then or they want to put the veteran up on a pedestal and say, oh my God, these guys are amazing and they can do no wrong. And I think, and I'm sure you feel this way too, most of us veterans don't like being put in either of those buckets. I mean, I certainly would never say a victim. I never really suffered anything that, my military career was completely positive and was never wounded and didn't have psycho. But other guys, even the ones who were severely wounded and have their lives changed by either psychological or physical wounds, don't feel as victims. Again, they volunteered. They're proud of their service for the most part. They want to be taken care of and want what they deserve, but they don't see themselves victim. And likewise, they don't want to be put up on pedestal. I've met one guy I got to interview who was a Medal of Honor winner from Afghanistan. And, he says it's kind of a burden that he carries. He had to get out of the service because of his wounds in the attack. He saved a bunch of people's lives and saved a general's life, actually, by diving on a suicide bomber in Afghanistan. But he recognizes that, that medal around his neck creates perceptions in people about him, and they expect him to be 10 feet tall and do no wrong. And he's not real comfortable with that either. Yeah. So it's that, just trying to, we want people to respect our service and acknowledge our service, but it doesn't define all of who we are. I'm a veteran. I'm proud of that, but I'm a father, I'm a husband, I'm a lot of other things besides a veteran, and it's part of who I am, and it's unique. It doesn't make me better than anybody else or worse than anybody else. Yeah. And just trying to fit in as just be another American with kind of a unique experience.
Well, I agree with what you just said about, you're a veteran. It doesn't make you better than anyone else. I've often said that myself. I don't feel like I'm better than anyone else because I spent the first half of my life in the military. I'm proud I did. It's something that I value. I have suffered some lingering effects from it that I'm still dealing with. But again, it shouldn't be something that defines your entire life. So when you think about these men and women coming home and the ones who are trying to integrate themselves back into society, based on your experience with the transition program and what you've seen, how do you think they want to be perceived as they move forward? They don't, like you said, they don't want to be treated particularly special. They don't want to be treated like they're completely broken down. But how do you feel they want to be treated? How do they want to be perceived?
Well, I think, my experience with the ones I've dealt with now, I want to qualify. Most of the ones I've dealt with are officers with long careers. That isn't necessarily the same as, say, some guy who served, maybe one or two tours and served in in a combat unit in Iraq, Afghanistan. So I don't want to generalize too much, but
Right.
I think, like I said, they want to be viewed as, hey, as a veteran, they bring some unique experience to the table, and that's valuable. Other people bring other unique experiences to the table from whatever their background is. I worked with people who were in the Peace Corps and spent time in third world countries, developing countries, living in a hut for a year or two,
Hmm.
and they certainly bring something unique to the table for an employer, um, to their community. And other people, whatever they went through. Some people had rough childhoods. I did not. I had sort of an idyllic childhood, and they bring, so being that veteran, whether you're a combat veteran or not much, just a veteran that didn't have a lot of combat experience, it's a unique experience that you bring to the table. You want people to recognize that, but other people can bring other unique experiences, and again, that experience is not necessarily placing you above or below other people. It's just sort of part of that mix. And again, as you said, not having it define your whole person. Sometimes I have met veterans that I think they remind me of that. There's that Bruce Springsteen song about the high school baseball player, and all he does is want to reminisce about how great he was in high school
And the
throwing the
glory
ball.
days.
And I kind of worry about a veteran who his whole life is defined by that veteran experience, because it's a little bit tough to move on from that. That you got to be able to put that in context. Now, obviously, if some guy was, severely affected psychologically or physically, it was very life changing, and I get that. And I don't mean to minimize that in any way.
Yeah.
But the guys who sit around and all they want to do is reminisce, and that was the highlight of their life. I think they need to sort of reflect and be able to put that experience in its proper place in the totality of sort of who they are.
Yeah, you know what that brings to mind, don't you? Kind of brings to mind Al Bundy on Married with Children,
Mhm.
and talking about his high school football days and his 4 touchdowns in one game.
Yeah, that's
But
exactly it.
yeah,
Although
but
I'm not sure,
I
Paul,
had,
everybody will get the reference, but you and
yeah,
I
I
are
mean,
a little
well,
older, but
yeah,
but
I'm kind
but
of
that's my
dating.
point.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely correct. But I had the privilege of serving with a young sergeant who actually worked for me as an instructor at Fort Benning, and he had spent 5 years in the 75th Ranger Regiment, and he was in Somalia when they got into that shootout in Somalia. And the young man came to me afterwards, came to the school. He was had the same career specialty I did, and he was looking for an instructor's job. And so I asked him the question. I said, "Well, Sergeant," I said, "what makes you want to leave the Ranger Battalion? You went through all that training. You've been a Ranger for almost 5 years." And he shared with me some of his experiences in Somalia. And he told me, he said, "You know what, Sergeant?" He said, "I want to have another life after the military." He said, "I've been doing this for a while," but he said, "I'm kind of looking ahead at what happens when I'm done." He was also planning on getting married in the very near future. So he was kind of looking ahead beyond the hua hua and the all the macho stuff that a lot of the guys get into. And it wasn't until after I went ahead and accepted him and brought him over as an instructor, that I found out we ended up going to an awards ceremony where he was given a Bronze Star for Valor for saving 4 other Rangers' lives during that firefight. But, he was the most unassuming young NCO. You'd never guess that about him. And, he was already looking at that. I don't want to be defined by this one thing. I'd like to move on with my career, do some other things, experience some other things. And, he turned out to be a really good instructor. So, I had a chance to see some of that firsthand while I was on active duty. Um, and you're right. I mean, I think people look at some veterans and, they expect, especially like you were talking about the Medal of Honor winner, they expect them to have this tough guy persona. And that whole experience then becomes the defining moment of the rest of their lives. So, I can understand them not wanting to be perceived that way for the rest of their lives. Get on, enjoy life after the military, because there's plenty out there. That. I've been retired since 2001, and even though I face some struggles, I'm enjoying my retirement as much as I can and what I'm doing now. And I'm sure you're trying to do the same thing.
Yeah, one thing about those Medal of Honor winners, I think this guy said to me is he says, most guys and they don't like to be called the winners of the Medal of Honor. They were
Yeah.
awarded the Medal of Honor, or
Yeah.
they are recipients of the Medal of Honor. I think that's the terminology that they prefer. But they say that, for most of the recipients, they receive the Medal of Honor for something that happened on the worst day of their lives.
Yeah.
Because inevitably, while a lot of times the Medal of Honor is awarded posthumously, but when it is awarded to somebody who is living, often there were comrades of theirs that didn't make it. And if you talk to them, they say, I wish I could have saved more of my buddies.
Yeah.
So it is in some ways, and nobody wants to be completely defined by the worst day of their life, whether
Sure.
it's in the military or something you may, a mistake you may have made in some life. In this case, these guys weren't necessarily making mistakes, but they don't want to be defined by that one experience. I think
Yeah.
they're more complete people than that.
Yeah. I mean, Rob, well, before we wrap up our discussion this evening, I'd just like to ask you if you had one message that you could share with all of our veterans, what would that message be?
Well, I think going back to my teamwork comment, the thing that concerns me, as you probably know, Paul, and you may have talked about it in other sessions, is the astoundingly high rate of veteran suicide is just something
Yeah.
that really bothers me. And so I ask any veteran to call upon that spirit of teamwork. If you need help, please reach out, call a fellow vet, call a buddy, somebody, reach out. And if you don't need help but you're aware of somebody that does, please reach out positively to them. Check in on your buddies now and then, and know that everybody's okay. Again, it goes back in the Air Force. We used to say, be a good wingman. That's what we depend on, is taking care of each other and looking out for each other. And so that's, if I were to leave a message, because that issue is such a terrible thing, and the military and the VA, I was involved with this when I was on active duty. Trying to figure out the ways to bring that rate down has been a real struggle. They don't have good answers, and
Yeah.
so we've just got to find ways to take care of each other. And so that's the message that I would leave to veterans: is call upon that spirit of teamwork, and take care of that buddy to your left and right.
And don't be afraid to ask for help when you need it.
That's right.
Yeah.
We like to perceive ourselves as strong, but be strong enough to ask for help.
Yeah. I mean, that's one reason why on my website, on the network, I have the Veterans Crisis Line out on my website. So, of course, anyone looking at the website can see the number up there that they can call. Well, Rob, I really want to thank you for coming on the show, being with us this evening, and sharing some of your experiences. I mean, you've had some pretty interesting experiences. Like I said, especially as a lobbyist, and then doing the transition work with veterans now. So I want to thank you for taking the time out to be on the show with us this evening. I'm sure that you provided some good insight, some useful information to our listeners, and we want to thank you very much for coming on.
Well, it's been absolutely my pleasure, Paul.
Yeah, and thank you. So I'm hoping that we have the website. Yeah, there it is. Um, so I wanted to pass this on to our veterans. The VA has a program, the Veterans Independence Fund, and there's the website up there for anyone watching the show. It's called Gift Cards for Financial Support for Veterans Independence Fund. And you can go to the website there at va.gov and look at the criteria. But basically, they are sending out $100 gift cards to any veteran who is struggling during the COVID-19 situation that's going on right now and that's in need of additional financial support. So for you veterans out there, there's the website there. Please take a look at it. If you need the help, don't be afraid to ask for it. All right. Well, thank you for listening to the WGSN-DB Going Solo Veterans Corner. This has been your host, Paul Holbert, and I want to thank you for listening this evening. Veterans, we hope that through our show, we're inspiring you to live your best life, and we hope to see you on our show 2 weeks from tonight. Thank you.